The avoidant does not ask for intimacy. This is the foundational truth that everything else in this piece rests on, and it needs to be held clearly before the specific behaviors are examined, because without it, the behaviors will be misread. They will look like ordinary acts of consideration, like the standard currency of any relationship in a functional phase, like nothing particularly significant. They are not nothing. They are, in the specific context of the avoidance psychological architecture and the enormous internal cost of what they represent, among the most significant things the avoidant is capable of offering. The avoidant does not ask for intimacy because asking would require the acknowledgement of wanting. And the acknowledgement of wanting is, in the avoidant's interior economy, the most expensive transaction available. It requires the admission of the need beneath the self-sufficiency, the disclosure of the vulnerability beneath the composure, the specific, unprotected, entirely exposing act of saying, in words or in the behavioral language that substitutes for words when words are too direct, that another person's closeness is something they are reaching toward rather than something they are managing against. They cannot say it directly, but they start doing things, small things often, quiet things that are individually deniable as evidence of intimacy seeking, and that together, in their accumulation and their pattern, constitute the clearest possible signal that the avoidance interior has shifted in the direction of wanting you closer. They start doing things for you that have no strategic value. The avoidant is, in general, an efficient allocator of their resources. Their time, their energy, their attention, these are not distributed carelessly. They go where they serve a function, where they produce a return, where they are not simply expended into the relational equivalent of open air. The avoidant in ordinary connection mode is generous within clear limits. They contribute what is required and manage carefully against the over-contribution that would signal an investment level they are not yet prepared to acknowledge. When the wanting of intimacy begins, this efficiency breaks down. Not dramatically, not in the sudden, obvious way of someone who has abandoned all their usual relational calculus, but in the small, specific, entirely telling ways of someone whose investment is beginning to exceed the limits of what the efficiency was designed to contain. They do something for you that you did not ask for, and that serves no purpose other than your comfort or your ease. They notice something you mentioned in passing, not the important things, not the things you flagged as significant, but the incidental detail that you yourself may have half forgotten, and they act on it without announcement. The thing is simply done. The information was held and converted into action with the quiet, unperforming efficiency of someone for whom the doing was natural rather than calculated, for whom your ease has become, without decision and without announcement, something they are attending to. This attending is not small. For the avoidant, whose resources are carefully managed and whose contributions are usually proportional to the acknowledged level of investment, the unrequested doing for you is the behavioral expression of something their words have not yet reached. It is the caring that cannot say its name, finding the action it can take instead. They start protecting your time in theirs. The avoidant's time is one of the most carefully managed resources in their life. Their schedule, their commitments, the specific architecture of how they organize their days, these are not incidental. They are, in part, the structural expression of the avoidant's need for controlled space. The avoidant who has too little unstructured time feels the intimacy pressure building toward the threshold of the retreat. The management of time is, in some functional sense, the management of closeness. When intimacy is wanted, the management changes. The avoidant begins to arrange their time in ways that create the possibility of you without the previous careful limiting of how much possibility is permitted. They hold space in their schedule that was not previously held, not dramatically, not the grand gesture of clearing their calendar or the explicit declaration that time has been reserved for you, but the quiet, practically expressed prioritization of circumstances in which you might be present. The subtle restructuring of availability in your direction. The calendar that has, without announcement, organized itself around the possibility of more rather than less of you. This restructuring is one of the clearest behavioral signals of genuine intimacy seeking, because it is the one that costs the most in terms of the avoidant's primary self-regulatory resource. Time that is structured toward you is time that is vulnerable to the intimacy pressure that your presence generates. The avoidant who is making this time available has made the calculation, not consciously, but in the felt, below awareness way of all the avoidant's most significant relational decisions, that the possibility of your closeness is worth the risk of the pressure it brings. That calculation is the intimacy seeking, expressed in the only language the avoidant currently has for it. They start asking questions that require them to care about the answer. This has been touched on in previous pieces, but it deserves specific attention in the context of intimacy seeking because the quality of the questions changes when genuine intimacy is wanted in a way that is distinct from the ordinary attentiveness that a functioning relationship requires. The questions become future-oriented. The avoidant who is not seeking intimacy lives in a relational present tense, attending to what is current, managing the connection as it exists in the immediate, not extending their attention into the future of the relationship in any significant way, because the future is where commitment lives and commitment is what the distance manages against. The questions that arrive when intimacy is wanted have a different temporal orientation. They reach forward. They inquire about your plans, your hopes, the trajectory of your life in a way that has the implicit texture of someone who is beginning to imagine themselves in proximity to that trajectory. Not as an explicit projection into a shared future dash, the avoidant is not making announcements, but in the specific quality of care that forward-looking questions about your life contain. The caring about where you are going rather than only about where you are. The investment in your future that is the behavioral precursor to the possibility of a shared one. They start tolerating discomfort in your presence without retreat. The avoidance comfort management, the continuous, largely automatic regulation of the intimacy temperature in their interactions, produces a specific and recognizable pattern. When an interaction approaches the threshold of too close, the retreat begins. It may be physical, it may be emotional, it may be the subtle shift in engagement that creates distance without visible departure, but it happens, reliably, at the threshold, as predictably as any regulated system responding to a signal that its threshold has been approached. When intimacy is wanted, the threshold moves, not infinitely. The avoidance system does not simply cease its regulatory function because genuine intimacy seeking is underway, but observably, measurably, in the specific, concrete evidence of interactions that go deeper, last longer, reach closer to the genuine interior than previous interactions were permitted to reach. In the conversations that the avoidant does not exit at the point where previous conversations were exited. In the moments of genuine emotional proximity that the avoidant remains present for rather than managing against. This tolerance is effortful. The discomfort is real. The intimacy pressure that the threshold approaching generates does not disappear simply because the avoidant has decided to remain in it. It is felt. It requires the active, ongoing choice to remain present rather than to take the exit that the system is offering. And the choosing to remain against the system's recommendation in the full presence of the discomfort that the system was designed to prevent is one of the most significant things the avoidant can do. It is the intimacy seeking made visible in the most concrete available form. The body staying where the fear is asking it to leave. They start letting you see the unmanaged version. The avoidant has a version of themselves that is presented and a version that is actual. The gap between these two versions is, in ordinary connection mode, carefully maintained. The presented version is competent, composed, emotionally regulated, possessed of the specific self-containment that projects the self-sufficiency narrative with sufficient conviction that most people accept it as the complete picture. The actual version is more complicated, more vulnerable, more alive to fear and need and the specific human imperfect reality of someone who is not, beneath the performance, quite as sufficient unto themselves as the performance suggests. When intimacy is wanted, the maintenance of the gap becomes effortful in a new way. The avoidant begins to let things through, not deliberately, not through the conscious decision to be more authentic, but through the accumulated effect of wanting closeness more than they want the protection that the gap provides. Through the specific moments when the genuine response surfaces before the management can intercept it, when the real opinion replaces the diplomatic one. When the actual feeling is expressed rather than the processed, acceptable version of it. When the unguarded moment is not immediately followed by the retreat that would restore the gap. These moments of unmanaged presence are the most intimate things the avoidant offers. They are also the most terrifying for them to offer. Each one is a small exposure of the interior, a crack in the presentation through which the actual person is briefly, revealingly visible, and the not immediately sealing of the crack, the allowing of the visibility to persist for the moment it persists, is the intimacy seeking in its most honest and most undefended form. The avoidant will not tell you they want intimacy. The words are too exposing, the admission too direct, the vulnerability too complete for the current state of their courage to sustain. But they will do these things, quietly, incrementally, with the specific and entirely genuine quality of someone whose interior has shifted in the direction of wanting you closer, and who is expressing that wanting in the only language their fear currently permits. Learn the language, not to decode it strategically, but to receive it honestly, as the significant, costly, genuinely offered thing it is.